Welcome to our special session of this virtual SERVSIG conference 2020 on sharing smart cities. That's me, Dominik Georgi from Lucerne University of Applied Science and Arts, and
I'm Chen from University of Canberra.
And we do some research together on sharing smart cities. We would like to present a little bit of that and also some research we initiated with this whole group in the background. We will come to that later. Sharing smart cities is actually the idea to enhance and support smart city developments in city by sharing aspects, by sharing mechanisms. And we started this idea after research we did in the sharing area, me, myself, and my research team at Lucerne. We do some research on share cities in several years. We started with typical consumer behavior studies on how do consumers behave in sharing economy, and then we realized when all business will be sharing in the future and more business will be sharing in the future, then cities might be more sharing. Cities and the city life will be a shared city life, and the question will be for city administrations how to frame and how to organize this shared city life. So we did two major research projects at our school with city administrations together, where we developed opportunities and levers that cities have in order to support development of shared city life. For example, we identified a row of possible measures that cities do, like in the area of regulation. They can forbid sharing, like Airbnb partly, but they also can support the development of sharing by, for example, extra lanes for carpools, or they provide hubs for sharing, like platforms where sharing providers can present themselves. So it's not only that the city offers sharing, but also the sharing economy is leveraged by the city. And at the same time, we observe that cities are developing smart city concepts. So the idea arose, how can we integrate this sharing idea into smart city concepts? And I discussed that with Tom, who does his own research since several years on sharing. So we came together and did some first research proposals and worked on a working paper before we started the research we want to present now. Tom.
Yeah, so we really start with these shared cities collaborations, and we present the articles about based on the findings of Dominik's team on shared cities at Academy of Management in Chicago. Then we realized that actually has a lot of potential. So we explore a little bit further, and thanks to the Switzerland, we got a grant, so we decided to actually create an event. And we understand that a smart city is heavily on technology, but sharing itself is inherently human-centric. And we really like to take that perspective into a more traditionally technology-heavy perspective on insurance or on smart cities. So that's how it's come about. The other perspective, we always think this is supposed to be a holistic perspective, bringing different domain of experts to actually address the issue of well-being of citizens and sustainability of cities. Dominik.
Yeah, and that was when we initiated the idea to have a research meeting with a row of researchers from different perspectives, a multidisciplinary approach. For example, we looked into blockchain, we looked into social economy, we looked into smart tourism, into green growth, inclusive smart cities. So various perspectives from various, not only business, but also quite multidisciplinary research areas, and we invited and had this grant in order to invite. Difficult to imagine these days, but in January we had a group of international researchers in Lucerne, where we did a common mutual event with two parts. First of all, we had a practitioner conference for one day where everybody proposed their topics, and then we had a 2.5-day intensive research symposium where we developed the Sharing Smart Cities topic further. Tom, you want to add here?
Yeah.
Here's a program of the 1-day practitioner conference.
Yeah, and we really want to just take this opportunity to thank all the sponsors and to support this event. This event, we have two parts. One is the summit and one is the symposium. So we will talk a little bit more in other videos about how we run this event. But basically, we have 18 scholars and practitioners that actually bring in their own perspectives and present their idea about how they think smart cities should be and how sharing take place in this particular the development of the smart city in our summit. And then in the actual symposium, that together we actually trying to create and develop the vision of sharing smart city. It's not a definition, but it's a vision. So how would like to take this forward? You can say it's like a movement, or is a way to move forward on the role of sharing as principle and mechanisms and its influence on smart cities.
And here that was the idea of the symposium, as Tom mentioned. One purpose was developing the vision for sharing smart city, but we also had further topics, and we, in difference to traditional conference, we really worked on these topics in workshop-like situations and really worked the whole day in a quite nice atmosphere here in the Swiss Alps. It was our seminar room behind this door, and we worked, as we mentioned, and we also had, of course, the opportunity for the social part.
Yeah, you have to have a stimuli to really help you to brainstorm. And why is it important we are in this setting is not all of us is really familiar with smart city concept, nor sharing as a concept. But we realize that sharing smart city is important because it really focuses on the citizens and also the city themselves and the combination of the two, about the well-being and sustainability. So that's where we come from. We believe that we need to have the holistic, collaborative approach to bring in, and this is the beginning. So we have people look at the green growth, look at sustainability, and from engineering perspective, we have tourism, we have business, we have many others, Bitcoins, and also ecology perspective. And this is just start because there are many more perspectives we believe that can actually contribute to make this vision about making contribution towards the well-being of citizens and sustainability of cities.
We would like to show some two exemplary outcomes of this work. There's much more, but here are two hints. One is the sharing principles that were developed, so to say, a sharing smart city onion that starts with the principles in the core as part of the vision of sharing.
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about that. So we think the outer layers of this onion is what currently smart cities they focus about, but the lack of principles and understand how principles influence the mechanism, and ultimately should be the beginning of it is the vision they are lacking in this movement. So particularly when we look at the principles, we talk about the human centricity, we talk about sustainability, we also recognize this complex urban system. That's why we bring in the experts from different fields and to actually trying to complete the pictures about how we live in the future, that actually we not only live together, a human being together, but also with other elements, I guess, from an ecology perspective.
Yes, and the second outcome, which looks quite simple here, but that was actually the result of many rounds of discussion and brainstorming and bringing literature from these various perspectives together. The current state of our vision of sharing smart cities. The sharing smart city is an intelligent and urban system that takes an integrated, human-centric and local approach to ensure resilience, ecological, social, and economic sustainability and well-being. So not to go deeper into that, but it's important to define what we mean by city. And we discussed a lot about the boundaries of cities, because it's not meant only the cities in itself, but also with their relationships with other cities, for example, and the relationship with their surroundings and smaller towns close to them. Then as Tom already mentioned, a very important characteristic of sharing smart cities from our view, the human-centric and local approach. And these are the objectives: sustainability with these 3 dimensions and well-being in the end for cities. And there's a lot of research how sharing can improve resilience of entities, of societies, and of cities. And especially in these days, we didn't mention that yet, but in these days with the coronavirus, there's a lot of need for resilience for our society and for cities too, and sharing can play here an important role.
Yeah, so you can see from our definition, sharing is not part of it, because that's why we are trying to work out the sharing principle and mechanisms that resonate with the notion of sharing smart cities. But we're trying to, from this vision, we're really trying to look at, for example, we talk about intelligent urban system instead of technology. So we take a ecosystem platform perspective, and that is beyond how we adopt the technology, for example, because we know the reason we adopt technology is really to enhance the human well-being. And then we also talk about the global approach. So that's, we can now see the relevance of it. And because during the COVID, there's very distinct hard boundaries that define us. There's a geopolitical boundaries that constrain human beings to interact or sharing with each other. So that is it's quite relevant. And we didn't actually, because we did our event in January, that's where the COVID probably just started, but never in a sense we anticipate it's going to be affect in this particular extent to our life and experience. And another point I would like to mention in this vision is the resilience. So we also recognize it's not just about a positive, but also throughout this process, it's also have a lot of challenges. And so resilience is really important. Another key areas we actually have to think about where sharing take a place to actually address this. How we create resilience through sharing to overcome the challenges that we're facing now. And there are many examples that we can see either before or after COVID. And then I think it's very important, one of our participant, Professor Russell-Bennett, Rebekah Russell-Bennett, actually talk about we have to really look at the outcomes. So that's where ecological, social, economic sustainability and well-being take place here. So we're trying to cover a holistic perspective. But back to our essential core is the well-being of citizens and sustainability of cities.
Yeah, in the remaining part of this special session, we would like to give you some idea of the various topics and perspectives. We look into that by 3 participants who will present their perspective on sharing smart cities. That's first of all Andreas Munzel. He does a lot of research on smart cities and smart city concepts. Then Rebekah, as mentioned by Tom, with her piece on sharing for good and for good. And Alireza.
From a social marketing perspective.
Exactly. And Alireza, he presents on circular economy from the material science perspective. So quite diverse perspective here compared to the business perspectives. So have a look.
Yeah. So you'll see the first 2. They're academic, and Ali is also academic, but also practitioner, entrepreneur. So we're trying to bring in this perspective for SERVSIG audience, especially for SERVSIG 2020, and now take place in the virtual place, is trying to marry between the academic and the practitioner as well. So that's certainly something that we would like to pitch here as well. The marriage between the 2, the real world and the theoretical world.
So the stage is our participants.
As a researcher in the broad field of the marketing field, our sharing smart cities definition resonates with my field of research for basically 2 reasons. First, instead of focusing on what abundant data and pervasive technology applications in the city can reveal about citizens, it is essential to investigate how data and technology can promote effective human interactions and sharing behaviors. A human-centric approach, which is inherent to our definition of sharing smart cities, is thus important in empowering citizens smart in their interactions. Second, in research projects with my co-authors, we have looked into the role of social capital in individual well-being. To do so, we adopted a social sustainability lens, another component of our definition here, that is investigating the process for creating sustainable, successful places that promote well-being, and focused in our research on how social media as a virtual place and living space potentially promotes well-being. Through our joint research endeavors on sharing smart cities, building upon social capital to better understand social sustainability strongly resonates with my research interests and field of study. This is as well the second link to my field and to my research interests, as well link to the question on sharing smart cities research of our research group, and also links to the question on how the current COVID pandemic impacts sharing smart cities. So while many of us currently suffer from extremely limited social interactions due to strict stay-at-home orders, and France is where I'm living in, is only one of those examples, building social capital online is probably increasingly important to complement and today even substitute for lack in probably offline social interactions. It is therefore, in my view, worth investigating if sharing mechanisms in smart, or in generally speaking, cities can thrive in the quasi-absence of offline social interactions?
Hi, I'm Professor Rebekah Russell-Bennett from the Queensland University of Technology, and I'm going to talk to you on the topic of sharing for good and for good. So I'm going to approach the topic of sharing smart cities from the disciplines that I use, and that is social marketing and behavioural economics. So the behaviour change approach. I'm going to have two theoretical lenses that I'm going to share with you, that is resource scarcity and ecosystem of shared value. And I'm coming from the perspective of the stakeholders that I work with, of households and communities. Okay, so what can social marketing and behavioural economics offer shared smart cities? Well, these are some of the fundamental assumptions that are shared between social marketing and behavioural economics. So, for instance, the temporal orientation indicates how people are motivated. And so essentially, people are motivated by short-term, self-oriented options rather than long-term and altruistic. And that means if you want to promote or engage people in sharing smart cities, then you have to understand their motivations and then leverage those motivations. We know that consumers are motivated to act by minimising pain and maximising pleasure. Again, if we make sharing smart cities painful for people, then they're less likely to participate. We know that people do not act alone, so homo sociologicus. And so everything we do in terms of engaging people in sharing smart cities needs to understand that people operate as a group, hence the focus on households and communities. We also know from extensive research that more education does not equal more action. So we know there's a knowledge action gap. And yet, how many times have you seen campaigns and programs that simply assume that if we just tell people what they need to do, if we just do an information campaign, or we just put an ad on social media or on television, that people will, of course, act. That is not true. The evidence base is very clear that there are many people know what they should do, but very few actually act on that. And that's where social marketing comes in and says, well, what are the goods and services that we can provide to actually facilitate sharing smart cities? How do we actually provide goods and services that help minimize the pain of sharing and actually enhance the pleasure of sharing? We know that consumers need to feel in control, and it's their definition of better choices, not ours. We know that consumers make choices that deliver them value, and that value proposition might seem bizarre to us. Why on earth would you drink too much? Why would you smoke too much? Why would you never exercise? It seems irrational to us. But to the person, there is a value proposition in not doing that behavior. Maybe they don't have the time. Maybe they work shift work, and the value proposition in their life is they have to work shift work to give them money to pay the bills, and therefore exercise comes very low down on that priority list. And we know that consumers differ by goal choice and by choice processes, and so a segmented approach is important. We know that there's a social dilemma around sharing. We know that many people see sharing as a zero-sum game. If I give something to you, then I lose in some way. We know that there's trade-offs that people make between benefiting others and benefiting themselves. And we know that the principal agent problem also exists. So the literature tells us a whole range of things about barriers and motivators for sharing. We know that if we feel possessiveness or materialistic, that inhibits sharing. We know that economic motivators in general prevail more strong, and they're stronger than environment and social motivations to share. And this goes back to my point about you've got to find the self-interest in sharing. You've got to make sure that you're overcoming some of these barriers, or people won't share. We know that, for instance, economic motivations are key in the area of sharing an expensive asset such as accommodation. And we know that social motivations are present for other kinds of experiences. So if you're looking at trying to encourage cities to share, you need to think about what are they sharing. If it's an expensive asset, then maybe you need to appeal with economics. However, if it's other kinds of assets or experiences, then the economic appeal is not as strong. We know that individual differences matter. We know that older people, women and low-income people are in fact more motivated to share. And we know the type of product matters. So if you're the user versus a provider of these 5 products, you can see the willingness to share differs, and it's quite stark for the accommodation, which is that expensive asset. We know that resource scarcity, and we define it as the real or perceived lack of various forms of capital, and resources cover a range of different areas. We know that chronic resource scarcity encourages consumers to make less selfish choices. So for instance, if we're in a drought, however, if the resource scarcity is short-term or medium-term, then people are more likely to be selfish and share less. We know that scarcity of financial resources increases consumers' concern for material goods over experiences. So if we don't have much money, we're more likely to want stuff than doing something. When exposed to scarcity cues, people become more competitive and less likely to share. So, and we know that when the sharing is not anonymous, that higher income consumers are more generous. So that is, if people know who is sharing, then you get your high income consumers are more likely to share. We also know that resource scarcity encourages creativity and also savouring the moment. So there are some benefits around resource scarcity, but we can see that it's a real driver of self-centred behaviour. So what can we do about this? Well, one way we can look at it is through the lens of social support. And so we need to see, what do people need to be supported? Not information campaigns necessarily that tell them what they need to do, but information that tells them how they need to do it. We can develop emotional esteem network and instrumental sources, all designed to overcome the sense of resource scarcity and encourage people and cities to share. The ecosystem of shared value approach from the Harvard Business Review is a useful framework. It's a framework that basically says, how do we get common values? Because common values underpin sharing. We know that we need a common agenda. That is, we need common goals. We need a shared measurement system. Everyone needs to be accountable. We need activities that actually reinforce each other, not compete with each other. We need constant communication, and we need a dedicated backbone support that actually ensures that everything comes together. And that's what communities and households need if they're going to share. So the key takeaways of sharing for good in the hood are that citizens have different motivations and biases for sharing. You need to segment your market and provide a value proposition to share that leverages those motivation and biases. We need to understand that groups operate differently to individuals, so you need to consider who you're trying to influence with any kind of programs. People need an immediate call to action to share. Altruism is simply not enough. Be careful about how you reward or punish citizens. Backlash can occur. And we know that sharing resources can take different forms of support. So consider which combination would work for your particular situation, your context. And we know that sharing smart cities requires an appropriate framework. So for instance, the ecosystem of shared value and backed up by the scientific evidence base. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel. My name is Alireza, and I'm doing research in the area of sustainable construction, sustainable future cities, as well as circular bioeconomies. The definition of sharing smart cities with respect to our research, when we talk about sharing smart cities, a few words coming into our mind. Firstly is the sustainability, ecological, social, and economic aspects of the city, as well as the smart part of the city. And at the core of our research and our design is always the citizens, because we believe the citizens should be at the core of the design, because they are the ones that are going to be living in the cities when we design them according to the conceptual framework of sustainability, as well as integration of various research methods when they come to applications. But of course, there are many challenges when you design a city. A city needs to be resilient. We can see one case in the case of COVID-19 around the world. Everybody was affected. Many cities were affected badly in Europe, in Asia, in America, North and South America. But you see how resilient a system could be to tackle those challenges. For us, a very interesting fact was the case of Singapore. Singapore is a small country, small state, but the resilience within the Singapore concept of designing the city to be resilient helped them to tackle the COVID-19 in a proper way and in a more, I would say, comprehensive compared to many other countries around the globe. But of course, there are many positive and negative aspects that COVID could have or already had on our work, on our research. For us, the main negative impact that we have seen was the fact that many funding agencies or government organizations, they had to reduce or sometimes cut their fundings for our research, even though we are doing research in sustainability areas, but some of these funding agencies had to somehow halt or postpone their fundings to our research, and with the idea of emphasizing more time and efforts and money on constraining the virus or challenge or tackling the challenge of COVID-19 rather than spending money on other areas of research. But of course, there were also positive impacts because we are seeing now more and more multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder approach to tackle challenges that are not just local but also globally. We see that many institutes around the globe are working very closely together to share information, to share data, to see how they can work together to somehow stop the spread of the virus and find solutions for a global challenge. So in the case of COVID-19, of course, I would say one important aspect is that now we see more and more research in the area of resilience, because as long as your city is resilient enough, you're able to put it together, we were able to withstand challenges that are not just locally, but also globally, economically, ecologically, as well as in the area of the impacts that it can have on the human beings as the level of citizens all the way to the government organizations and the government bodies. Thank you very much, and I will be very happy to take on some questions.
So we are really pleased that we got these opportunities in January 2020, before everything got locked down, that we got this chance to bring this cohort of experts to deliver and develop this vision of sharing smart cities. We will thank our sponsors, which you can see from our slides. And the event actually took place, the first day is the summit, and then have a 3 days or 2.5 days of symposium. Dominik.
Yeah, the summit was took place in Lucerne and Lucerne city, and then afterwards the symposium we went, as you see on in our background, on the mountain, on the Rigi mountain close to Lucerne. After 1 hour boat trip, we took the mountain by mountain train, and yeah, we stayed there for 2.5 days and had a little mountain hotel for ourselves, almost for ourselves. So it was really like a retreat situation in the mountains, and we were lucky with the weather, not so lucky with the snow, but many participants were hoping for. But when we descended at the last day, the first snow was coming, so we had also that in the end. And yeah, as Tom mentioned, thanks to the sponsors, to the Swiss National Fund, to my school, Lucerne Business School, to Tom's school back then, University of Newcastle, and to Stiftung Mercator Switzerland, who supports a lot of our sharing research. Thanks a lot.
And thanks all our participants, because they really try very hard to actually deal with and have very open mind. They are very open-minded, actually, because they are all experts in their field, and to be vulnerable to the idea of sharing smart cities and willing to contribute. We really appreciate the effort.
That's true, and extremely flexible and spontaneous in response to our wild ideas regarding this research.
Yes.
Many thanks.
So again, we really encourage you to join us, and we will do our best to share our experience with you. Thank you.
Thanks.